November 23rd, 1968, Los Angeles, California. Whisky a go-go, 10:42 p.m. The first thing Eddie Cruz noticed wasn't the music. It was the smell. Stale beer soaked into wooden floor, mixed with cigarette smoke that had been trapped in the walls for years, thick enough that even the neon lights above the bar looked tired, like they were breathing slower than they should. He stood just off stage, 6 feet from the curtain, holding a sunburst Fender Stratocaster that didn't belong to him. $189.50 retail. He'd checked. Twice. His fingers hovered over the strings, not playing, just feeling the tension in them, like they might snap if he pressed too hard. The room beyond the curtain pulsed with noise. Not loud yet, not screaming, just that low, restless hum of 40 people waiting for something to happen. 40 people on a Saturday night. Sunset Strip was supposed to be louder than this. Eddie shifted his weight. The wooden floor creaked under his boots. Cheap ones, $11.99 from a discount store 2 blocks down. His left heel had started separating last week, and every step made a soft peeling sound. He kept his foot still. Didn't want anyone to notice. Hey! The voice came from behind him. Rick Danner, house manager, mid-30s, always chewing something. Tonight it was gum. You're on rhythm, Rick said, flipping through a clipboard without looking up. Don't get creative. Eddie nodded. Yeah. Rick finally glanced at him. Quick, dismissive. You know the chords? Eddie hesitated, just a second too long. Rick exhaled through his nose. It's 3 songs, maybe 4. Don't mess it up. Then he walked away, just like that. Eddie looked down at the guitar again. His reflection bent across the glossy finish, distorted, stretched, like even the instrument didn't recognize him. 3 songs. That's all he ever got. 3 songs in the background. No name on the poster outside. No mention when the crowd talked about the night later. Just sound behind someone else's voice. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded receipt. Rent, $65 due in 3 days. He unfolded it, then folded it again, slower this time, in his apartment on La Cienega. The radiator hadn't worked properly in weeks. 3 guys, 1 room, 2 mattresses, 1 window that didn't close all the way. At night, the cold slipped in like it belonged there. He'd been playing guitar for 9 years, since he was 13. Back when his father still listened. Back when someone said, "You've got something." Eddie closed his eyes for a second. Just a second. From the stage, a burst of feedback cut through the room. Sharp, electric, alive. Someone testing an amp. The sound vibrated to the floor, up his legs, into his chest. That feeling, that was the only reason he stayed. Not the money, not the room. That, the way sound could move through you like it knew something you didn't. A girl laughed somewhere in the crowd. High-pitched, nervous. Glasses clinked behind the bar. Someone dropped something, a dull thud, followed by a curse. Normal night, forgettable night. Eddie stepped closer to the curtain and pushed it slightly with 2 fingers, just enough to see through the gap. A sea of faces, blurred, moving, no one looking at him. Of course not. Why would they? He wasn't the show. He wasn't even the opening act. He was the space between songs. Places, someone shouted. The room shifted, energy tightening. Conversations cutting off mid-sentence. Chairs scraping. Eddie let the curtain fall back into place. His right hand moved instinctively, brushing the strings. A soft chord, barely audible. Then another, quieter, like he was apologizing to the guitar. Don't get creative. Rick's voice echoed in his head. Eddie swallowed. What would happen if he did? If, just once, he didn't stay in the background? If he played something real? His fingers pressed harder this time. The note rang slightly sharper, louder than before. It lingered in the air for half a second longer than it should have. He froze. No one said anything. No one noticed. Of course. He exhaled slowly. 3 songs. Just get through 3 songs. Then $15 in cash. Maybe $20 if the night went late. Then back to the apartment. Back to the cold. Back to being nothing. From the other side of the curtain, the crowd suddenly shifted again, not louder, but different. A ripple, like attention had moved from one point to another. Eddie frowned. That wasn't normal. He leaned forward slightly, listening. A chair scraped. Someone near the entrance said, "Wait, is that?" Another voice, lower. "No way." Eddie's grip tightened on the guitar neck. Something was happening. Not on stage. At the door. And whatever it was pulling the entire room toward it. Eddie didn't move, didn't breathe, because somewhere between the sound of that shifting crowd and the silence that followed, something had changed. And in exactly 3 minutes, the night he was supposed to disappear inside was going to see him. For the first time, the door stayed open longer than it should have. That was the first sign. Cold air slipped into the Whisky a go-go in a slow, deliberate wave, brushing against the back of Eddie's neck even from behind the curtain, carrying with it the distant sound of traffic from Sunset Boulevard, engines, horns, life continuing outside this room like nothing important was about to happen inside it. But inside, something had shifted. Eddie pushed the curtain again. Just an inch. Near the entrance, a man stood half in shadow, backlit by the streetlight outside. Tall, lean, a dark jacket that didn't quite match the rest of the crowd. Too worn, too real. A wide-brimmed hat tilted low. Sunglasses. At 10:47 p.m. Inside, Eddie frowned. The man didn't move like anyone else in the room. While everyone else leaned forward, try and confirm, he did the opposite. He leaned back slightly, like he was already somewhere else, watching. Not the stage, not the band, but the edges of things, the unnoticed corners. Eddie felt it before he understood it. The man's head turned slightly, not toward the spotlight, toward the curtain, toward him. Eddie dropped the fabric immediately, heart quickening. "That's him," someone whispered from the crowd. "No, it's not," another voice replied, too fast. "It is. I saw him at the Forum last year." A pause. Then, quieter. "What's he doing here?" Eddie swallowed. He knew that tone. Recognition mixed with disbelief. The kind reserved for people you weren't supposed to see this close. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking, just slightly. From the stage, a voice cut through. "All right, let's go." Jim Morrison. Calm, low, controlled. Eddie froze. The crowd reacted instantly. A surge of attention snapping back to the stage like a rubber band pulled too far and suddenly released. But not all of it. Some of it stayed near the door. Split focus. Something was wrong. Eddie stepped out from behind the curtain, just enough to take his position on stage left. The lights hit him immediately, warm, blinding, flattening everything into brightness and shadow. He couldn't see the man at the door anymore. Only silhouettes. Jim stood at the microphone, still, one hand loosely wrapped around the stand. Black leather pants. White shirt, half-buttoned. Hair falling into his face, unmoving despite the low hum of the room. His eyes scanned the crowd slowly, not searching, feeling. Then they stopped, not center, not front row, off to the side, near the entrance. Jim's head tilted just slightly. A flicker of something crossed his face. Not surprise, not exactly. Recognition, but quiet, always quiet. Eddie noticed it. No one else did. Ray Manzarek's keyboard hummed to life. A low, steady tone that filled the room like fog rolling in. The drummer tapped his sticks together. 1, 2, 3. The set began. Eddie played the first chord exactly as rehearsed. Clean, safe, invisible. The sound blended into the room, disappearing into the larger shape of the music. That's what he was good at, disappearing. But Jim wasn't singing yet. He stood there listening, not to the band, to something else, to the room, to that same shift Eddie had felt minutes ago. Then Jim stepped back from the microphone, just one step, small, but wrong. Ray glanced over, confused. The rhythm faltered for half a second, then recovered. The crowd didn't understand, but they felt it. Something wasn't following the script. Jim turned his head again, toward the entrance, and this time he moved slowly, off the mark, away from the center of the stage. Eddie's fingers slipped on the strings for a fraction of a second. A muted note, barely audible, but enough to make his chest tighten. What is he doing? The music continued behind him, but Jim was no longer part of it. He stepped down from the stage. No announcement, no explanation, just movement. The crowd parted instinctively, a narrow path forming as people stepped back, unsure whether to follow him or stay rooted where they were. Eddie couldn't see the door anymore. Too many bodies shifting. But he saw Jim stop, 3 feet from someone. Silence spread outward from that point like a ripple in water. The band faltered again, then stopped. Completely. 40 people. Silent. No clapping. No talking. Just watching. Eddie leaned forward slightly, trying to see. A gap opened between 2 shoulders. And there, the man in the hat, still wearing sunglasses, still not moving. Jim stood in front of him now, close enough that there was no doubt. No distance. No stage. Just 2 figures, face to face in the middle of a room that had forgotten how to breathe. Jim studied him, not like a fan, not like a rival, like he was reading something written beneath the surface. The man tilted his head, a small smile, almost invisible. Then Jim spoke, softly, too soft for most of the room to hear. But Eddie was close enough to catch it. Jim crouched slightly, lowered himself just a fraction, bringing their eyes level despite the crowd, despite the moment, despite everything. And then, in a voice that didn't belong to the stage at all, he asked, "Why are you hiding in someone else's night?" For a moment, no one moved. Not the crowd, not the band, not even the air. The question hung there, quiet and sharp, like it had been waiting longer than anyone realized. The man in the hat exhaled slowly. Up close, Eddie could see him now, clearer than before. The angle of his jaw, the faint shadow of a smile that didn't quite reach his mouth. His fingers, long and still at his sides, except for a slight twitch in the left hand. Recognition spread through the room in fragments. One person leaned forward. Another covered their mouth. A third whispered, That's Hendrix. Jimi Hendrix. Uninvited. Unannounced. Standing 3 feet from Jim Morrison in a room that suddenly felt too small to hold both of them. But Jimmy didn't react to the whispers. He looked at Jim. Then, after a pause that stretched just long enough to matter, he spoke. "I'm not hiding," he said. His voice was low, rough around the edges. Not defensive, just tired. Jim didn't move, didn't blink. Then why stay in the dark? Jim asked, short, direct. Jimmy's head tilted slightly. The faintest hint of amusement flickered across his face, then disappeared just as quickly. "Maybe the light gets too loud," he said. A few people in the crowd shifted. Someone near the bar set their drink down without taking a sip. The glass made a soft click against the wood. Eddie felt something tighten in his chest. This wasn't a moment for them. It wasn't even about the music anymore. Jim stepped closer, just half a step. "Loud isn't the problem," he said quietly. "It's what you hear inside it." Jimmy's fingers flexed once, a subtle movement, like he was reaching for a guitar that wasn't there. "I hear too much," he said. Silence. Jim studied him, really studied him. Then, softer, "What are you trying to drown out?" The question landed differently, heavier. Jimmy looked away for the first time, his gaze drifting past Jim, past the crowd, landing somewhere near the stage lights, bright, unfocused. "When I was 15, he said slowly, "I used to play in my room for hours. No amp, just the strings. A small breath. Couldn't even hear it properly. But I felt it." He paused. The room leaned in without realizing it. "Back then it was simple," he continued. "You play because you need to, not because someone's watching." His jaw tightened slightly. "Now," he exhaled through his nose. "Now every note feels like it belongs to someone else." Eddie's grip on his guitar neck tightened. That sentence, it hit too close. Jim didn't interrupt, didn't rush. He let the words settle. Then, after a moment, "I know that feeling," Jim said. Jimmy's eyes flicked back to him, curious, measuring. Jim leaned back slightly, resting his weight on one foot. His voice dropped even lower, more personal now. "When I first got to Los Angeles," he said, "I had nothing. No stage, no band, just notebooks. A faint, almost invisible smile. Pages no one wanted to read. The crowd was completely still now. 20 people, maybe 30. No movement, no sound. I used to walk Venice Beach at night. Jim continued. 2 a.m., 3 o'clock, just walking, saying the words out loud to the ocean. He glanced down briefly. Didn't matter if anyone heard. He looked back up at Jimmy. That's the only time they felt real. Jimmy watched him carefully, then asked quietly, "But you made it. A beat. How?" Jim didn't answer right away. He looked around the room instead, at the crowd, the stage, the lights, the band waiting without knowing what they were waiting for. Then back at Jimmy. "I didn't try to be heard," he said. "I tried not to lie." The words landed soft, but they stayed. Jimmy's expression shifted, just slightly. Something behind his eyes moved. Not relief, not agreement. Something more complicated. The kind of understanding that doesn't fix anything, but names it. Behind them, someone in the crowd took a step forward, then stopped, like they realized they were standing inside something fragile. Jimmy looked down at his hands again. Empty. "No one wants the truth every night," he said quietly. Jim's head tilted. "No," he agreed. A pause. "But you do." That hung there, heavy. Jimmy let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but without humor. "Yeah," he said, "that's the problem." Another silence. Then, from the edge of the room, a voice broke through, sharp, dismissive. "This isn't a therapy session." A man in a suit, late 30s, industry type, arms crossed. "People paid to hear music," he added. "Not whatever this is." The words cut the moment in half. A few people shifted uncomfortably, reality pushing back in. Jim didn't look at the man, didn't acknowledge him at all, but something in his posture changed. Subtle, still. Then Eddie heard it, a voice closer, quieter, Jimmy's, almost to himself. "I don't even know if I remember how to play for me anymore." That was it. That was the line. Jim's eyes flickered. Just once. And for the first time since he stepped off the stage, something in his composure cracked. Barely visible, but real. Jim didn't respond right away. He just stood there, looking at Jimmy, as if that last sentence had shifted something deep in the room, deeper than the night itself. Then he turned, slowly, back toward the stage. 40 people watched him move. No one spoke. Even the man in the suit near the bar stayed quiet now, arms still crossed but no longer certain. Jim stepped up onto the stage again, one foot, then the other. The wooden boards creaked under his weight. He didn't go to the microphone. He didn't signal the band. Instead, his eyes moved, scanning, searching, until they landed on Eddie, stage left, half in shadow, holding a guitar that wasn't his. "Come here," Jim said. Not loud, but clear. Eddie froze. For a second, he thought Jim meant someone else. There were other musicians, other bodies, other possibilities. Jim didn't repeat himself. He just kept looking at him, waiting. Eddie swallowed. His legs moved before his mind caught up. One step, then another. The distance between them, maybe 12 feet, felt longer than anything he'd ever walked. The room followed him. Every eye, every breath. Eddie reached the center of the stage and stopped, unsure where to stand, what to do, how to exist in this sudden, impossible spotlight. Jim gestured toward him, a small motion. "Play something," he said. Eddie blinked. "What?" Jim's expression didn't change. "Not for them," he added quietly. "A beat. For you." The words hit harder than anything else that night. Eddie's throat tightened. Behind him, Ray shifted slightly at the keyboard but didn't touch a key. The drummer lowered his sticks. The entire band stopped existing. This wasn't their moment anymore. Eddie looked down at the guitar. His hands were shaking again. Worse now. 40 people. Maybe more. Jimi Hendrix standing 10 feet away. Jim Morrison watching him like he was the only thing in the room. I don't. Eddie started, then stopped. Because the truth was, he did. He just hadn't let himself. For years. "Play," Jim said. One word. Soft. Final. Eddie exhaled. Long. Slow. Then his fingers moved. The first note came out wrong. Too sharp, too tight. It hung in the air for a second, awkward and exposed. Eddie winced slightly. No one reacted. No one laughed. No one moved. So he played another, this one softer. Then another. A pattern started to form. Hesitant at first, like footsteps in the dark, unsure where they were landing. The notes didn't rush. They lingered, stretching into the quiet space the room had made for them. Eddie closed his eyes, and something shifted. The sound changed. It deepened. His fingers stopped searching and started remembering. The way they used to move when he was 13, sitting on the edge of his bed, playing to no one, for no reason except that he had to. The notes grew warmer, looser. They bent slightly at the edges, like they were breathing. The air in the room changed with them. You could feel it, not hear it. Feel it. One note slid into the next, low and aching, carrying something raw underneath, not polished, not perfect, but real in a way that made people forget where they were. A woman near the front covered her mouth. Someone at the bar set their drink down without looking. The man in the suit lowered his arms. Even Jimmy stepped closer. Just one step, his head tilted, listening, not as a performer, not as a legend, but as someone recognizing something he thought he had lost. Eddie didn't open his eyes, didn't look at the crowd. He wasn't playing for them anymore. He wasn't even playing for Jim. He was somewhere else. The small room, the broken radiator, the nights that stretched too long. Every note carried a piece of that with it, and the room held it. All of it. No one clapped. No one spoke. 30 people. Completely silent. The last note came softer than the rest. It didn't end. It faded, like it didn't want to leave. Eddie's fingers lifted from the strings. Silence rushed back in. Heavy, full, alive. He opened his eyes. Jim was still watching him. Closer now. There was something different in his face. Not approval, not pride. Recognition. Like he had just seen something true. Behind him, a click. Subtle, almost invisible. Lena Whitaker, near the edge of the crowd, lowered her camera slightly. Her hand steady, but her expression not. She knew. Even then, this mattered. Jim turned his head slightly. Toward Jimmy. Just for a second. Then back to Eddie. And in that moment, without applause, without announcement, without anything loud or obvious, Eddie's life split into two parts. Before this, and after, no one clapped. Not because they didn't want to, because they couldn't. The sound Eddie had left in the room was still there, stretched thin across the air like something fragile, something that would break if anyone touched it too quickly. Jim stepped closer. One step, then another, until he was standing directly in front of Eddie again, close enough that Eddie could see the faint lines under his eyes, the way his gaze didn't just look at you, but through you, like he was trying to find a part you kept hidden. Eddie lowered the guitar slightly, didn't trust his hands. Jim tilted his head. That, he said quietly, is what they're afraid of. Eddie blinked. Who? He asked. Jim's mouth curved just slightly. Not quite a smile. Everyone who told you to keep it small. The words landed softly, but they stayed. Jim turned, slowly, looking out at the room. The crowd, the band, the man in the suit who now avoided eye contact, the quiet tension that still held everything together. Then he spoke. Not louder, just clearer. They don't want truth every night, Jim said. A pause. They want something they can survive. A few people shifted, uncomfortable, recognizing themselves in that. But truth, Jim continued, his voice dropping slightly, truth doesn't ask permission. He glanced back at Eddie. It just shows up. Silence. Heavy. Jimmy stood a few feet away now, closer than before, his arms relaxed at his sides. The sunglasses were still on, but his posture had changed, less guarded, more present. Listening, Jim reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Slow, deliberate, he pulled out a small, folded piece of paper, worn at the edges, creased like it had been opened and closed too many times to count. Eddie watched his hand, didn't breathe. Jim held the paper for a moment, looking at it, not reading, just remembering. Then he held it out to Eddie. Take it. Eddie hesitated. What is it? He asked. Jim's eyes flickered. Something I wrote, he said, a beat, before anyone was listening. Eddie reached out. His fingers brushed Jim's for a fraction of a second as he took the paper. It felt lighter than it should have, like it carried more than its weight. Eddie unfolded it slightly. Handwritten, uneven, a few lines crossed out. Others pressed harder into the page, like they mattered more. At the bottom, one line stood alone. Different ink, cleaner. Don't play to be heard. Play because silence is worse. Eddie's chest tightened. He looked up. Jim was already watching him. Keep it, Jim said. Not for what it says. A small pause. For when you forget. Eddie nodded. Couldn't speak. Behind them, someone shifted. The faint sound of shoe against wood. The room was starting to come back to itself, slowly, like people were remembering where they were. But not fully. Not yet. Eddie swallowed. Why me? He asked. The question came out quieter than he expected. Jim's expression didn't change. You were already doing it, he said. A beat. You just stopped trusting it. Eddie looked down at the paper again, then back up. There was something else he needed to ask. Something that had been building since the moment Jim stepped off the stage. What if I lose it again? He said. Honest. Unfiltered. Jim held his gaze for a long second. Then, you will. Eddie's stomach dropped slightly. Jim didn't soften it. Everyone does, he continued. A pause. The trick is noticing sooner. That was it. No comfort. No reassurance. Just truth. Jim stepped back. One step. Distance returning. The moment beginning to close. Eddie felt it. That quiet shift when something is ending, even if no one says it out loud. Wait, Eddie said. Jim stopped. Didn't turn around yet. One more thing, Eddie added. Jim glanced over his shoulder. Eddie's grip tightened slightly on the paper. How do you know one's real? The question hung there. Simple, but heavy. Jim looked at him. Really looked. Then answered. Soft. Final. It costs you something. A beat. Every time. Silence. Jim turned. Walked toward the edge of the stage. Then off. The crowd parted without being asked. A narrow path opening in front of him. No one reached out. No one spoke. They just moved, instinctively, like they understood this wasn't something to interrupt. Jimmy watched him go. Still, quiet. Then, after a moment, he followed. Not beside him, not together, just in the same direction. Separate, but connected by something no one else could see. Eddie stood on the stage, unmoving, the guitar still in his hands. The paper now folded carefully in his palm. He watched Jim's back disappear into the dim light near the exit. No goodbye. No final glance. Just gone. And for the first time in his life, Eddie didn't feel invisible. Chicago, Illinois, September 14th, 1988, 9:12 p.m. The sign outside read, paper door. Faded red paint. 2 words slightly uneven, like whoever made it cared more about meaning than symmetry. Inside, the room held exactly 32 people. No more. Never more than that. Eddie Cruz stood behind the bar, wiping down a glass that was already clean. The motion was automatic now, something his hands did while his mind drifted somewhere else. A guitar rested against the wall behind him. Not expensive, not rare, but worn in the exact places his fingers still returned to, even after all these years. Mr. Cruz? The voice came from the far end of the bar. A young man, maybe 24, a notebook in his hand, pen already uncapped, like he was afraid the moment might leave before he could catch it. Eddie looked up. You can call me Eddie, he said. The journalist nodded quickly, stepping closer. Nervous energy. First interview. Maybe. I'm with Downbeat magazine, he said. They told me you don't usually do this. Eddie gave a small shrug. I don't. A pause. The journalist glanced around the room, taking in the dim lights, the quiet conversations, the absence of anything flashy or loud. Then his eyes landed on the frame behind the bar. Centered. Alone. A single piece of paper. Slightly yellowed with age. What's that? He asked. Eddie followed his gaze. For a second, he didn't answer. Then he set the glass down. Carefully. That, he said, is the only reason this place exists. The journalist stepped closer, drawn to it. "Can I?" "Yeah," Eddie said. "Just don't touch it." The frame wasn't expensive. $18.99. Bought in 1972, 2 weeks after. Eddie didn't finish the thought. Inside it, the paper sat exactly as it had that night. Fold lines still visible. Ink slightly faded, but not gone. And at the bottom, that line, the journalist leaned in, reading it silently, then looked back at Eddie. "Is it true?" he asked. "About that night?" Eddie exhaled slowly, leaning back against the bar. For a moment, the room around him seemed to dim, like the past was pushing forward, asking to be seen again. He told the interviewer, voice quiet, eyes distant. Eddie's gaze drifted somewhere past the walls. "November 23rd, 1968, he said. "Whisky a go-go. I was 22, making $15 a night, playing behind people who didn't know my name." A small pause. I wasn't supposed to matter. The journalist didn't write, didn't interrupt. Eddie continued. There were maybe 40 people in the room. Cold air came in through the door around 10:47 p.m. A faint smile. That's when everything changed. He glanced at the paper again. "He didn't give me success," Eddie said. "He didn't give me a career. A beat. He gave me permission." Silence. The journalist swallowed. "And Hendrix?" he asked carefully. "Was he really there?" Eddie's eyes shifted slightly. A flicker of something. Memory, maybe? "Yeah," he said. "He was." Another pause. "Didn't say much after," Eddie added. "Just listened." The journalist nodded slowly, processing. Then, "Where were you when you heard about Morrison?" he asked. Eddie's hand stilled on the bar. July 3rd, 1971. Paris. The news didn't reach him until 2 days later. "I was in a bus station," Eddie said quietly. "Chicago, 6:20 in the morning. A breath. Someone left a newspaper on the seat next to me." He looked down at his hands. "I read it 3 times. A longer pause now. "He was 27, Eddie said. "Same as a lot of them." The room behind him carried on, low voices, glasses clinking, life continuing, but softer now, like it respected the space his memory was taking up. "What did you do after?" the journalist asked. Eddie's eyes lifted. "I stopped chasing noise," he said. "Simple. Final. I opened this place in 1978. Kept it small on purpose." He gestured around. 32 seats. No stage lights. No contracts. A faint smile. Just music. The journalist glanced again at the framed paper. "Do you know what it's worth?" he asked. Eddie nodded. "Last offer was $85,000, he said. "A beat." I said no. "Why?" Eddie looked at him. "Because some things aren't currency." But he didn't say that. Instead, "Because it already paid for everything," he said. The journalist didn't ask anything else. He didn't need to. After a moment, he closed his notebook. "Thank you," he said quietly. Eddie nodded. The young man stepped away, disappearing back into the low hum of the room. Eddie turned slightly, his eyes settling once more on the paper behind the bar. Still there, still unchanged. All these years later. Outside, the city moved like it always had. Loud, restless, chasing something it could never quite hold on to. But inside, the air was different. Quieter, truer, and somewhere in the space between a note and silence, that night in 1968 still lived. Not as a story, as a moment, the kind that doesn't end. Only echoes. Some nights change everything without anyone noticing. This was one of them.